Think twice before staring at someone with golden eyes, because at some point in human history, that color didn't exist. I'm Obscurophiles, and if you want more videos like this one, hit subscribe. Let's go. Your eyes are lying to you right now. Not metaphorically, literally. The color you see when you look in a mirror isn't really there. It's a trick of light, physics, and millions of years of survival pressure, all compressed into a structure smaller than a marble. And depending on which color landed in your iris, you carry a completely different story. Some of those stories are about evolution, some about mutation, some about diseases hiding in plain sight. Let's start at the beginning. Somewhere near the equator, tens of thousands of years ago, a group of early humans looked out across a blazing savanna. No shade, no sunglasses, just raw sunlight hammering down from every angle. And somewhere in that group, one person couldn't track the prey anymore. Their vision collapsed under the glare, and that was it. No second chance, no retry. The hunt was over before it began. But the person standing next to them, they saw everything. Not because they were stronger or faster, because their eyes were built differently. Brown eyes. Brown eyes are the original human eye color, and if you have them, you carry something ancient inside you, a biological shield that was forged under conditions most of us will never experience. The key is melanin, a pigment so dense in brown eyes that it acts like a natural blackout curtain for the iris. While other eye colors scatter incoming light in different directions, brown eyes suppress it. They absorb it. They shut it down before it can scramble your vision. Think about what that means on an open savanna at noon. The difference between spotting a predator 200 meters away and missing it entirely could come down to milliseconds of visual clarity. Brown eyes gave their owners those milliseconds, over and over again, across thousands of generations. That's not a coincidence. That's selection pressure doing its job. Today, more than 70% of the human population has brown eyes, not because it's a default, not because it's boring, but because it worked. Brown eyes are a living fossil of the conditions that shaped us as a species. And here's something most people don't know. Under the right light, a low afternoon sun, candlelight, the strange haze of golden hour, brown eyes stop being brown. They shift. They open up into amber, into honey, into something that looks almost illuminated. The melanin doesn't disappear. It just catches the light differently, revealing what it normally keeps hidden, like a locked room that only opens at a specific angle. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer this in the comments. What color are your eyes? Because by the end of this video, you're going to see them completely differently, and I want to know if your perspective shifts. Brown eyes made us survive, but around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, something happened that had nothing to do with survival. Something happened that changed the way human beings look at each other, literally and permanently. A single genetic mutation. One person, one change, one moment in history near what we now call the Black Sea region. And from that single event, every person on Earth today with blue eyes descends. Every single one. More than 500 million people, all tracing back to the same original mutation in a gene called OCA2. That mutation didn't add anything, it removed something. It reduced melanin production in the iris dramatically, and in doing so, it completely changed how light behaves inside the eye. Here's the part that genuinely makes your brain short-circuit. Blue eyes aren't blue. There is no blue pigment inside them. None. What you're seeing when you look at someone with blue eyes is a physics phenomenon, the same process that makes the sky blue and sunsets orange. Light enters the eye, scatters through the layers of the iris, and only certain wavelengths bounce back outward. Those wavelengths happen to read as blue to your visual cortex. But if you could somehow remove the scattering effect, what you'd find underneath is a transparent, colorless structure. You've been looking at an optical illusion your entire life, and somehow that illusion became one of the most desired aesthetic traits in human history. In Northern Europe, blue eyes accumulated centuries of mythology around them. Purity, cold intelligence, a kind of spiritual otherness. Some legends claimed that people with blue eyes could see into the soul. Others said they could steal it. But there's a less poetic side to this story. Blue eyes change with age. They can lighten, dull, shift toward gray. Not because something is being added, but because the body is changing around them and the melanin distribution across the face and skull shifts over decades. The illusion that captivated a room when someone was 20 can quietly fade into something more muted by the time they're 60, as if the trick slowly runs out of energy. If blue eyes are an illusion, green eyes are something even more improbable. They're an illusion built on top of another illusion, requiring a chain of biological coincidences so specific that only around 2% of all humans have ever pulled it off. That makes them statistically rarer than red hair, rarer, actually, than being born with 12 fingers. And here's why they're so hard to make. For an eye to appear green, it needs a very precise amount of melanin, not enough to shift the iris toward brown, but significantly more than a blue eye carries. On top of that, it needs a second pigment called lipochrome, which introduces a yellow-gold tint into the mix. Now take that yellow pigment, layer it over the light scattering effect that blue eyes produce, and you get a color that shouldn't mathematically exist as often as it does. The yellow and the scattered light blend into something the eye reads as green. Remove any single component of that equation and the green disappears. Too much melanin? Brown. Too little? Blue. Wrong ratio of lipochrome? Hazel. Green exists only in the exact center of an extremely narrow window, which is why green eyes behave the way they do. They're unstable, they shift. In shadow, they deepen toward forest green, almost dark. In direct sunlight, they can appear nearly yellow. In indoor lighting, especially warm light, they can look olive or even brown. They don't have a fixed color. They have a range of states that respond to their environment in real time. Across centuries of folklore, green eyes became the color of the supernatural. Witches, forest deities, creatures that didn't quite belong to the human world. And it's not hard to understand why, because green eyes genuinely don't behave like anything else.
They seem to change depending on who's looking and from what angle, which to someone without a scientific framework for light scattering probably felt like something otherworldly was happening. One more thing about green eyes that almost nobody knows: no one is actually born with them. Newborns with green eyes will have them display as blue or gray at birth. The green only develops over months and sometimes years as the lipochrome settles into the iris. The eye is still deciding what it wants to be. And you're still with me, because we're only halfway through, and what's coming next is where things start to get genuinely strange. Hazel eyes don't have an identity, and that's exactly what makes them remarkable. Look at a pair of hazel eyes in the morning, and they might read as green. Check again in the afternoon in a different room, and they've shifted to gold. Step outside into bright sunlight, and they look brown. Walk into a space with blue walls, and something olive appears. This isn't a psychological effect or selective perception. It's a structural reality of what hazel eyes actually are. Biologically, hazel eyes sit in the middle of the melanin spectrum, more than blue or green, less than brown. That intermediate level means the iris never fully commits to one behavior. It can't absorb light completely like a dark brown eye, and it can't scatter light cleanly like a blue one. It exists in a permanent negotiation between the two. And that negotiation is sensitive to everything: the direction of incoming light, the temperature of that light, the colors surrounding the person, even emotional state. When the pupils dilate from excitement, fear, or low light, the iris stretches physically, and that changes how the pigment appears.
When blood circulation shifts with emotion, the subtle coloring of the tissue underneath the iris changes the overall tone. Excitement can pull the green out. Calm can warm the tones toward gold. Intensity can darken the whole eye towards something almost brown. Hazel eyes are the only eye color that responds to the world in real time. Every other color has a baseline it returns to. Hazel doesn't. It's always reading the room. But that misses the point entirely. Hazel is both things at once, and neither one completely. It refuses categorization, which, depending on your perspective, is either deeply frustrating or genuinely fascinating. Amber eyes belong to predators. That's not dramatic language. That's just the reality of where this color predominantly appears in nature. Wolves, eagles, hawks, tigers. Amber is a hunter's color. So when it shows up in a human iris, something interesting happens in the minds of people who look at it. Fewer than 5% of the human population has true amber eyes, and they're frequently misidentified as hazel or light brown until they're seen under the right lighting conditions. Under direct light, they're unmistakable. Not gold, not honey, not a warm brown. Amber. A pure, saturated, almost glowing amber. The mechanism behind them is the same compound we mentioned in green eyes, lipochrome, but in amber eyes it dominates without the counterbalancing melanin that would shift the color toward brown, and without enough light scattering to create a blue or green effect. Lipochrome alone, relatively undiluted, produces this color, which is why it's more common in animals than humans. And here's where it gets behaviorally interesting. Some researchers have suggested that humans may carry a vestigial instinctive response to amber and gold tones in the eyes, a kind of low-level alertness triggered by a color the brain associates with predatory animals. Not fear exactly, more like heightened attention, the sense that whatever this person decides is probably already decided before you've spoken. Across many cultures, amber-eyed individuals have been historically associated with leadership, self-containment, and a certain quiet authority. They look at you like they already know the outcome, and something in you, old, instinctual, pre-rational, recognizes that. Gray eyes are the quietest color on this list. They don't announce themselves, they don't shimmer or shift dramatically. But when a pair of gray eyes locks onto you, the experience is unlike anything else, because they don't give anything away. Less than 3% of people have gray eyes, and structurally they sit even lower in melanin content than blue eyes. That means they scatter even more light. But they do it differently. Instead of producing that warm, vivid reflection you see in blue eyes, gray eyes dissolve the light. They diffuse it into something neutral, cool, and almost textureless. The practical effect of this is that gray eyes are nearly impossible to read emotionally. Brown eyes can warm, blue eyes can sparkle, green eyes can deepen with mood. Gray eyes stay gray. They don't light up with enthusiasm. They don't dim with sadness in any obvious way. They absorb the emotional signal before it can become visible. In mythology, gray eyes were given to gods of wind, oracular wise women, and queens of ice, figures whose power came precisely from the fact that they revealed nothing while perceiving everything. That mythological instinct wasn't random. It was picking up on something real about the experience of being looked at by gray eyes. You feel seen, but you see nothing back. Now we're moving into territory that most people don't even know exists. Red eyes, violet eyes. These sound like fantasy, but they're real, and they're among the rarest optical phenomena in the human species. Both arise from the same source, the complete or near-complete absence of melanin in the iris. In severe cases of ocular albinism, the iris contains essentially no pigment at all. There's nothing to absorb or scatter the incoming light. So what does the light hit? It passes through the iris and reflects off the blood vessels sitting behind it. What bounces back isn't a color, it's the visible evidence of blood. Under intense light, this produces a reddish tone, faint but real and clinically documented. The violet variation is more circumstantial. Depending on the exact angle of light, the internal architecture of the eye, and minor structural variations, the same underlying albinism can produce a lavender or violet appearance instead of red. It's the same mechanism, different output. A famous case often cited is Elizabeth Taylor, whose eyes were described as violet or purple throughout her career. In reality, she had blue-gray eyes with a genetic variation around the eyelashes that affected how surrounding color reflected into the iris. The violet was real in the sense that it appeared visually, but it was contextual, not pigment-based. For individuals with genuine albinism, the red is more consistent and carries real clinical implications. These eyes have almost no protection against UV radiation. They require constant shielding from sunlight. The visual acuity is typically reduced. Seeing the world through them isn't the dramatic supernatural experience the myths suggest. It's medically demanding in ways that most people never have to think about. Black eyes are the endpoint of the melanin spectrum. Science technically says they don't exist. What we're actually seeing is a brown so saturated, so completely loaded with melanin, that functionally zero light escapes from the iris. The iris and the pupil become almost indistinguishable from each other at normal viewing distances, like looking into a space that absorbs rather than reflects. In extremely rare cases, a condition called aniridia, the iris is almost entirely absent, leaving a vast dark opening where the colored ring should be. Not black as a color, but black as an absence, a void where structure should be. That image of an eye with no visible iris is precisely where the folklore comes from. In oral traditions across many cultures, black eyes marked something outside the normal human spectrum, entities in disguise, hidden gods, presences operating by different rules. The biological explanation is mundane, extreme melanin concentration, or absent iris tissue. But the psychological effect on observers is not mundane at all. There is something about an eye that gives nothing back that activates very old, very deep pattern recognition instincts in the human brain. Heterochromia is what happens when the melanin distribution algorithm breaks down, and the result is one of the most visually striking phenomena in human biology. Less than 1% of people have it, and it comes in 3 distinct forms: Complete heterochromia, two entirely different colored irises, one blue, one brown, one green, one gray. The eyes simply received different instructions and followed them separately. Partial heterochromia. A section of one iris is a distinctly different color from the rest, a patch of gold inside a green eye, a shard of blue in an otherwise brown iris. It looks deliberate, like something was edited. Central heterochromia. A ring of one color around the pupil, transitioning outward into a completely different color at the outer edge of the iris. It looks like a solar eclipse scaled down to the size of a coin. None of these variations affect how the person sees the world. Their vision processes identically to anyone else. But the social experience of having heterochromia is different, because their eyes communicate something before a single word is spoken. Not a message with specific content, but a presence, an anomaly that signals, this person is not quite like the others, which, depending on context, has meant very different things across history. Sacred, cursed, touched, gifted. Here's the final thing on this list, and it might be the most important one, because it has nothing to do with aesthetics. Some people develop a golden ring around the inner edge of the iris, not a color of eye, not a genetic variation, a ring, clearly visible, metallic in tone, sitting at the border between the iris and the pupil. It's called the Kayser-Fleischer ring, and it is a medical emergency written in eye color. The ring is copper, literally. It's a physical accumulation of copper deposits in the corneal tissue, caused by a genetic disorder called Wilson's disease, a condition where the body loses its ability to process and eliminate excess copper. Instead of being expelled normally, the copper builds up, in the liver, in the brain, and visibly, in the eye. In early stages, the ring is only detectable with specialized ophthalmic equipment.
In advanced stages, it becomes visible to the naked eye, a metallic arc or sometimes a complete circle, framing the iris with something that looks, to the untrained eye, like an unusual pigmentation feature, like an aesthetic quirk. Which is exactly the danger, because there are people who have discovered this ring during a routine eye exam, having had no idea they were living with a chronic genetic condition that was quietly accumulating copper in their organs. The ring isn't painful. It doesn't affect vision directly. It's a silent marker, a visual warning from the body, written in a language most people don't know how to read. So if you've ever noticed a strange golden reflection in someone's eyes, something that doesn't quite fit, something that looks almost decorative but slightly wrong, don't dismiss it as an unusual eye color. It might be exactly that, or it might be a signal that needs a doctor, not a compliment. Your eyes are not just the color you were born with. They're a record of evolution, of mutation, of where your ancestors survived and where they struggled, of what your body is doing right now, silently, at the level of pigment and tissue and light. Brown eyes held a species together under a relentless sun. Blue eyes emerged from a single person once and spread to 500 million. Green eyes exist only because two separate biological mechanisms aligned precisely enough to produce something that shouldn't statistically occur. Amber eyes carry the color of predators. Gray eyes give nothing away. Red eyes see the world through blood. And somewhere out there, a golden ring in someone's iris is a message written in copper, waiting to be read. You looked in the mirror this morning and saw a color. Now you know what that color actually is.
I'm Obscurophiles. If this changed how you see things, literally, subscribe and drop your eye color in the comments. I want to know which story you're carrying.